Howdy y'all. Fahrenheit 451 is a book that needs little introduction, but a brief summary may suffice for people unfamiliar with its plot. Okay, so this may not be the most visual thing in the world, so if you want to skip my retelling of the story, just jump right to the timecode on screen. Alright, now that they're all gone, let's begin. In a world where firemen start fires instead of put them out, all books are to be burned by said firemen, so that the ideas that lay inside their pages may not upset any of the public. Most people lock themselves inside of their rooms with television screens making up all four walls, with little radio sets in their ears, providing an ever-constant, uninterrupted form of meaningless media for the masses. Guy Montag, working as a fireman, starts to have his doubts about the world around him. It's established that, sometime before the events of the novella, Montag has started to hoard some books from his job and hide them inside of an air vent in his house. For however long it's been, Montag has been going about his life, burning books while growing a little secret stash of them for his own. Then, on a late-night walk back from work, Montag meets up with a young lady, Clarice. Putting it plainly, Clarice is a pure bundle of joy. A person that, unlike others, is genuinely happy. She doesn't watch television, nor does she have a seashell radio piece sticking out of her ear at all times. Due in part to her upbringing, Clarice is far more observant of the world around her than most. Montag takes to Clarice well, sparking a genuine friendship with her. Though through her utter happiness, Montag quickly realizes how utterly unhappy he is. A fact for him that becomes all the more real when, on the same night he meets Clarice, he goes home to discover that his wife has overdosed on sleeping pills. Two handymen are called up to save Montag's wife, Mildred. The men are disturbingly unmoved by the scene, performing their operations on her in the same fashion a plumber would fix a leaky sink. As they leave, they tell Montag that this is only one of several overdose cases that they deal with in a night, showing the reason for their lack of bedside manners. Mildred awakes the following morning, starving from her operation but otherwise oblivious to the events that unfolded last night. She doesn't even remember taking the entire bottle of sleeping pills, and refuses to hear Montag out when he tries to tell her what she did, simply passing it off as something she would never do. She then resigns herself to her daily activity of sitting in their three-walled television room, still having the seashells blast the radio in her ears. Mildred spends so much time inside of the television room that she unironically calls the actors members of her family. Montag goes back to his job of burning books. In actuality, the novella makes it seem like the firefighters mostly just sit around the firehouse, having what little fun they can. At the fire station there is a mechanical hound. The beast has 8 legs and a syringe that shoots out from its body to deal a sedative into its victim. Sometimes the firemen resort to letting small animals loose on the floor below, having the mechanical hound chase the poor creature down. They place bets on which animals will be killed by the metal creature. Montag goes through life like this for some time, going from his disinterested wife to his dreadful job, all the while meeting up with Clarice during his long walks. Clarice being someone that, while Montag doesn't quite understand, he enjoys the company of quite a bit. But then she doesn't show up one night, nor the next after that, nor the next after that. Soon after Clarice goes missing, Montag is put on a job to burn down a whole bundle of books in a nearby house. When they get there, an old lady is present, begging them to not burn down her books. As Montag secretly steals another one for his growing collection, the other firemen pour kerosene all over the lady's house. They start preparations to light it up, but then the woman pulls out a match of her own and ignites the flames herself, engulfing her books and herself in the inferno. Later that night, Mildred, in a rather uncaring manner, still with the seashells in her ears, tells him what happened to Clarice. Clarice was a ray of sunshine whose light was just permanently blotted out. Montag, emotionally reeling from Clarice's death and the soup on the side he just witnessed, has fallen sick. He lays on his bed, planning on taking the day off from work. He wonders whether or not he should quit his job entirely. As he's laid out in his bed, his boss, Captain Beatty, shows up. Beatty, sensing that Montag has some doubts about what he's doing, comes to tell him about the history of the firemen and why their job is so important in the first place. He explains how the public have wanted easier, simpler forms of media for some time now, how books have grown shorter and shorter as the average attention span of people has drastically declined. After this, the government took the opportunity to burn all the books from there, burning the lot of them up so that the ideas inside wouldn't have people thinking too hard and get uncomfortable, mentioning that with uncensored books, many people have the opportunity to be offended by what's inside of them. So take them all away, and feed the public a constant slop of heavily regulated television and radio instead, and everyone will be happy. Beatty then leaves the household, but on his way out he lets Montag know that a fireman is allowed to hold onto a boat for 24 hours before they will be put under arrest. Montag, now far more shaken up, comes clean to Mildred about his secret. He climbs up to the vent and pulls out all the books he has collected in the past, creating a small mountain of illegal pages on their floor. Mildred goes wild, wanting to call the fireman right away, but Montag holds her back. He wants to read some of the books, to try to see what's so important in them for the woman to light the match earlier. He tries to read a few pages here and there, only to find that he can't really make sense of it at all. Remembering a time when he ran across an old man in a park some years ago, during said encounter Montag had figured that the man, Faber, had a book hid on him. Knowing his time as a fireman was over, and desperate to find some kind of meaning in books, Montag decides to find the old man, using the address that Faber had left on their previous encounter. Montag carries what might just be the last copy of the Holy Bible in his hands as he makes his way to Faber's house. Once there, Faber tells of the importance of books, his history with them, while also talking about some of the negative aspects of modern society. The two decide to work together. Faber gives Montag a special seashell that he had been working on, one that they'll be able to talk back and forth with, much like a modern Bluetooth headset. Their plan is basic for now. Montag will go back to work with the special seashell on so that Faber can hear all the goings-on of the firehouse. And from there they plan on framing other firemen with books so that the entire institute may fall in on itself. Montag then heads back home, leaving his copy of the Holy Bible with Faber. Guy Montag soon finds himself surrounded by idiots as his wife calls together some of her friends so that they might watch television in their parlor. Montag slowly grows more frustrated with the vapidness of the women. He becomes so frustrated, in fact, that he throws all caution to the wind, and pulls out one of his hidden books and starts reading poetry to the ladies. All the while, Faber is begging him to stop through the seashell. Most of the women are confused or scared, while one of them starts to cry from the poetry being read. In a desperate attempt to save face, Mildred tries to play the whole thing off as nothing more than a gag. Montag, realizing that he's probably made a great error, plays along with Mildred, even going as far to burn the poetry book in their home's incinerator. All the women quickly leave nonetheless, convinced that Montag is insane. The following day, Montag is forced to face the penalty for his poetry reading. Beatty has all the firemen loaded up as he drives to their destination. Part 2 of the book ends with the fire truck stopping right in front of Montag's house. It's revealed that all of the women, including Mildred herself, had filed a complaint to the firehouse. Beatty suits Montag up, telling him that he's to burn down his entire house and that afterwards he'll be arrested. Montag does just that, using the flamethrower to spew fire in every crevice of his house, also making sure to burn down a stack of novels that have been left out as well. After the house is reduced to a smoldering pile of ashes, Beatty discovers the special seashell that Montag is wearing. Hearing Faber talk right to the ex-fireman, the captain laughs it off, saying that they'll trace the earpiece and arrest Faber as well. Upon hearing this, Montag snaps. He turns the flamethrower on Beatty and burns the man alive. Montag, after making sure that the other firemen won't chase him, flees the scene. On the way out, he gathers up 4 books that he had previously hidden in his backyard. He runs over to Faber's house, all the while hearing radio reports of the police now starting a search for him. He rests at Faber's house for a bit. Eventually, the old man advises Montag to cross the river and try his bets with some of the homeless colonies on the outside. Montag quickly does his best to rid his smell out of Faber's house so that none of the mechanical hounds would give the old man trouble. He then disappears into the night, running all the way to the riverbank and then safely floating to the other side. On the crossover, Montag sees several mechanical hounds and helicopters come up on the riverbank, only to turn right back around. Montag wanders in the untamed woods until he runs across a small group of ragged people taking warmth by an open fire. The people introduce themselves. Granger shows Montag a small battery-powered television that they have nearby. On it, Montag watches the final moments of the police chase. In a foul move to save face with the public, the officers find a random man walking on the streets, say it's Montag, and kill him right then, officially capturing the rogue fireman. After that, the people around the fire introduce Montag to their purpose in life. Everyone in their little village will read a book, and through a method devised by one of their members, will later be able to perfectly recall what they read. So they'll read whatever literature they can find, burn whatever they just read, and then later read the book aloud so that its words are still intact. It's through this method of recalling books that they're able to avoid any legal trouble from the firemen. Montag gets to know the people there, quickly feeling included as one of the people there point out that he's now their copy of Ecclesiastes in case their previous man ever gets injured. And then, the entire other side of the river bursts into a gigantic flaming ball of death as a nuclear bomb is dropped on the city. Yeah, okay, so I kind of forgot to mention that throughout the story the entire world is on the brink of war. Bombers are constantly heard flying through the sky, the radio tells of the swift victory that's sure to come for the country, and Montag actually hears news of war starting during his police chase. So the nuclear explosion doesn't just come out of nowhere like I made it seem. Going back to the, brief synopsis, Montag, Granger, and the others watch the explosion safely from the dense woods. And after eating a small meal, they start their way back to the other side of the river to help any survivors. Knowing that, even though the rest of their lives is bound to be extremely difficult, their time has finally come to recall all of the literature to the world again. Now, honestly, just saying all of this does a disservice to this brilliant book. I do highly recommend you give it a read. Granted, if you're watching this, you probably already have read the book and just clicked on this video hoping that I would validate your opinions. But I digress. I want to bring up a few things and explore them in a bit more detail. Let's look at the character of Captain Beatty. During his talks to Montag, he often quotes loads and loads of literature, having literal fights between himself as he acts out disagreements between him and Montag, quoting a surplus of great minds all along the way. He also brings up interesting moments in history throughout the story. He's able to correctly give the context for a rather odd quote the old woman said before igniting herself. And he later goes to tell Montag the history of the firemen, not as it's written down in their books, but as it actually happened. He hates books now, enjoying nothing more than ridding the world of them through flames, but it's pretty evident that he used to care a great deal about them. I like to think that Beatty had his own secret book collection at one point as well, reading whatever text he could get his hands on, mimicking Montag's actions, though granted that's purely speculative on my part. There's nothing in the text that would suggest that really. Another character I want to analyze a bit further is Faber. Faber describes himself as a weak, cowardly man. He has taken the time to invent a piece of spy technology in the two-way seashell, but he's been far too afraid to put it to use until Montag shows up. But more importantly, he's old enough to remember when the firemen first got started in the first place. He even mentions how he could have spoken up back then, he could have done something, but even then he was unwilling to fight for a change, and soon enough the firemen became far too strong for just one man to make all that much of a difference anyway. The character of Faber is a warning of what can happen if people don't stand up for what they believe in before it's too late. As the old saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and poor Faber had to learn that the hard way. Going on to something else, the television that Mildred watches literally plays non-narrative slop. The actors will shout sentences at the other actors that have nothing to do with what the previous had just said. Arguments will sprout out of the blue and end in a dizzying swirl of colors and loud noises, in an effect to make the dull viewing audience believe that something had just happened. At one point, Montag asks his wife what's the show about, and she's only able to list off the characters' names, not even able to think of what the plot is supposed to be. Now, in the greater context of the mass public, wanting easier and quicker forms of media to digest, all of this vapid television watching works wonders in the story, showing how far people's attention spans could shorten, resulting in them gobbling up nonsense on their screen. Which, yeah, okay, Ray Bradbury was a little depressingly correct on that one. But, it is a little funny if you look at this in the context of Bradbury writing all of this down in 1953. We're talking the early days of television here, where a lot of it was variety shows with very little else in the way of plot. So, yeah, I can easily see how Bradbury figured what television would look like if it continued down this path. Although the irony of this is that he would actually go on to be a big influence in television. He would help Rod Serling discover some of the excellent writing talent for The Twilight Zone, and much later he'd have his own television series in the Ray Bradbury Theater. Stepping to the sidelines of television, let's discuss the portable radios that everyone has in the novella. Bradbury writes them down as seashells that people insert in their ears to listen into the radio broadcast. Y'all, I cannot urge enough that Bradbury comes as physically close to describing earbuds as a man from the early 50s would have been capable of doing. It's one of those moments where a piece of older media gets an aspect of the future so right that it's just bizarre reading it now. But anyway, people use said seashells always. It's shown with Mildred that people continue to listen in on them even as they sleep. This, mixed in with the four-wall television room that people lock themselves into, shows how the public will use the media to close themselves off of what remains of the real world. Listening, watching, consuming what they're given, all of them being happy without an original thought in their head. But the problem is, they're not happy. Most, if not all of the population, carries the deep, suppressed weight of unhappiness with them wherever they go, only using the media to cope and convince themselves that they are enjoying life. This is shown most clearly when Mildred overdoses on the sleeping pills, her repressed sadness taking control in an attempt to rid herself of the misery of living in a meaningless life. And remember, the workers that save her say that this is just one of the many overdose cases that they deal with, showing that she's not the only one so dreadfully miserable. Later in the story, when Montag has Beatty in his flamethrower sights, the captain doesn't back down, he actively mocks Montag even more. He wants to be burned alive, a fact so obvious that Montag himself realizes just a few minutes later. And a detail that I really like, when Montag first meets up with Faber, Faber tells Montag that his unhappiness won't be resolved through books alone, but that society as a whole has cut out what is needed for people to be truly happy. I really like this because it really would have been very easy for the story to act like books non-existing would be enough for all of the misery, and that they alone would be the cure. But no, it's smart enough to show that that's not the case, that the problem is far bigger than merely a lack of literature. And yeah, this is a book from the 50s that deals in themes of repressed sadness, at a time where mental health care was a far cry from what it is today. Many people were just expected to put on a happy face and cope with their unhappiness in the least bothersome way they could. I have no doubt that Ray Bradbury witnessed similar struggles with mental health and decided to comment on it in Fahrenheit 451. A message that is strikingly ahead of its time for a book written in the 20th century. Another comment about society in this novella is all of the cars at play. Several points throughout the story, it's mentioned how people drive recklessly on the road. Montag is nearly run down by a group of teenagers who just wanted to kill him for the fun of it. And everyone is shown to be driving around 90 miles per hour everywhere. It's even stated that most enjoy running over small animals during their car rides. All of this is here because cars were just a lot more dangerous back then than they are today. There is no national set speed limit, each state was just allowed to make its own. And most were generally faster than what they are today. That, mixed in with the lack of safety features that cars had back then, made it where a lot more people tragically lost their lives in automobile accidents. Also, Ray Bradbury hated cars in real life, down to the point where the man never got a driver's license. Thankfully, since the time of the book's release, modern speed limits and safety features has greatly reduced the number of motor casualties. But as long as there are speed demons on the road threatening people's lives, the warning of dangerous driving in the book will never become obsolete. Okay, so I've praised this book a good little bit now, but now I want to get into some of the things I really didn't much care for. One thing is how the dialogue is written. Most of it is fine, but there are a few times where the characters will have long talks about their opinions and observations, and it felt very unnatural to me. Clarice goes on about how people don't talk about anything original, and later Faber discusses the importance of books, as I had mentioned earlier. At these points, the characters stopped feeling like themselves, and it felt like Ray Bradbury himself was talking directly to the reader about his opinions on the matter. With Faber, at least you could make the argument that this is a man who's had a long time to think the topic over, and when finally given the chance to, he can recall all of his ideas directly to Montag with little effort. But in Clarice's example here, I'm really not buying it. Again, this character is supposed to be a pure little delicate ray of sunshine to get the ball rolling on Montag's journey. Even though she is shown to be observant of the world more than most, I really don't buy her being this judgmental of other people. Also, in relation to that, with how Bradbury writes Mildred and her friends, he kind of makes them too stupid, intentionally writing vapid dialogue for them to say so that the reader can easily understand that they are dumb, and thus incorrect about their stances on books. I know this is supposed to show how television will rot the mind away over time, but it honestly just feels like these characters are straw men for Montag to easily knock down. Their dialogue is too vapid, too redundant. It honestly feels unbelievable that anyone, even a television-watching zombie, would talk like this. Something I forgot to mention till just now, in the book it's established that firemen aren't used to put out fires anymore because all houses are fireproof. How is this supposed to work? Houses being fireproof makes no sense. The story tries to explain it by there being some type of fireproof cover over everything. In fact, Montag later cuts through this fireproof thing later when he burns down his house. But surely to goodness, if he can do that, other people in the community can cut down their fireproofing and set fires to their house. How are actual firemen not needed in the society? I refuse to believe there could ever be a world in which no fires could ever start in houses. Bad, Ray Bradbury, bad. How dare you make something illogical? Can you tell I'm not going off a script?
Oh, and one more thing I gotta mention. The ending. A nuclear explosion dropping down and killing everything in sight. It sure is a memorable way to end the book, I'll give them that. A great reset has just occurred, people are finally free from their oppressive overlords, and have the chance to start a better world for themselves. And Montag and the rest starting over to the ruined city to help the survivors is an oddly bittersweet, hopeful note for the book to end on. If you don't think about it too much. Did Ray Bradbury not know about nuclear fallout? Never heard of the Lucky Dragon number 5, did ya? Even if Montag and the others survive the initial blast, they're still gonna feel the brunt of all that radiation that's sure to follow, making this a little less hopeful.
Okay, I wrote that part being funny because I just assumed that the Lucky Dragon number 5 incident happened before the book was written. No, actually, Fahrenheit 451 came out before the whole Lucky Dragon number 5 incident, and it was this accident that kind of brought about the dangers of nuclear fallout to the whole world. So almost certainly Ray Bradbury didn't know what nuclear fallout was when he wrote Fahrenheit 451, which kind of makes it even sadder, because it's like the literal definition of, oh my sweet summer child, you have no idea what horrible death you just put your characters through.
But stepping aside from all of that, Fahrenheit 451's positives far outweigh its negatives. If you even consider what I listed to be negatives in the first place and not extreme nitpicks. One of the most recognized, revered dystopia novels of all time, and it's earned that reputation. And then there's the movie! I have a feeling this is one of those examples where more people have actually read the book than watched the film. The movie leaned towards the obscure side, but does it deserve to have more eyes on it? Let's find out. The film actually retells the plot of the book pretty well, but there were of course some changes made along the way. Before we get into the real nitty-gritty of it, let's go over some of the smaller alterations. In the novella, while books themselves weren't allowed, other pieces of literature were. The firemen pull out a heavily revisionist history book out at one point, and Mildred is seen reading a script of the television she's about to watch. In the film though, all text is gone, on everything, period. Pill bottles and magazines only have colors and shapes on them. And police files are detailed with circles and triangles. And you know what? I'm all here for this. It helps make the world feel far more abstract than its book counterpart, making it easier for the audience to accept all of the odd things that happen in this movie. While the film cuts out Bradbury's earbuds and wall-room TV sets, it did however correctly predict widescreen televisions.
I'd rather have a second wall set put in. They say when you have your second wall screen, it's like having your family grow out all around you.
Although it is funny to see that it still has scanned lines. I guess they weren't able to predict high definition. Another nice little detail is that all modern TVs are shown to be of the wider model, but when we see TVs that the book people have, theirs have an old 4x3 display. A small bit of visual storytelling to illustrate how the book people aren't up to date with technology like everyone else. The television shows are almost exactly as vapid as they're described in the book, although it is funny seeing it played out in the movie because it reminds me way too much of Dora the Explorer.
Isn't it, Linda?
Absolutely.
Chalk that up to another thing Bradbury predicted, annoying children's television. I noticed that there are quite a few points where the dialogue is almost the same as it is in the novel. Not many films can pull that off, but it works surprisingly well here. Though they did cut out all the times where Bradbury got a little too preachy to the reader, which was a good call on their part. I believe this film changes it so that Montag didn't start collecting books until after his first interaction with Clarice. I say believe there because I didn't see anything in this movie that suggested that he was before, although the scene where all the books are burned is a little ridiculous because it depicts the house overflowing with books from all nooks and crannies. Far too many books for him to have snuggled if he had just started when the film suggested he did. The film adds a few new scenes in the story as well. There's a section here where Montag teaches a young aspiring group of firemen the basics of finding books. It helps in world building, and it's a nice bit of irony that Montag is the one to teach them how to find, seeing how he would go on to hide books later. Although it does make me question why he hides books exactly where he taught people to find them, but then again, maybe he literally ran out of space to put them anywhere else, cause seriously, where did you get this many books? There's also a little subplot added with Beatty teasing Montag about the idea of a coming promotion, but it's the literal meaning of filler. It goes nowhere and really should have just been left out. The film has noticeably given the firemen a good deal more authority over what they had in the book. Here the firemen are allowed to search people without question, and pull people over to the side to give them a forced haircut. While it was also hinted in the book, the film really pushes a Nazi parallel with the firemen, down to the point where, when Beatty is making the speech about why books should be burned, the film has him hold up a copy of Mein Kampf. Subtle. Although, oddly enough, the police are still established to be a thing in this movie.
The police haven't done their job very well. Who is this woman?
If this is how the firemen are allowed to act, then what's the police like? What is their role in society? The film also took out all mention of the mechanical hound in the book, which is fine. I imagine something like this would have been nearly impossible to put to screen back in the 60s, and outside of one scene where it had stunned Montag in the novel, it never really was that plot relevant.
One of the flaws in the film, for me, is the absence of the mechanical hound.
Okay, fine, guess I'll shut up then. Okay, now let's get into some more major parts of the movie. Let's discuss characters. Starting with Captain Beatty, he has noticeably been made more pleasant in the film. In the book, he would go on long rants at Montag, tearing his ideas down with one carefully chosen quote after another. Here, though, he's made far more approachable, being, dare I say it, warm to Montag throughout the movie. Look at the point where he's being burned alive. That's a man that thought of Montag as a friend. That's a man that's truly been hurt. And not just by the flames. While the film did cut out all the excessive quote mining, it did include one scene of him talking about the dangers and uselessness of literature. Originally, these parts read as a man really digging into why he hated books. Here, though, with Beatty's more warm-natured tone, it reads more like he's just listing off all the propaganda that he's been fed all of his life. Honestly, I prefer his film counterpart. Book Beatty serves to show the ruthlessness of the firemen, while film Beatty shows how even seemingly nice people can be swept up in the evils of society, and perform horrible acts without giving it a second thought. Now let's go to the character of Clarice. They aged her up, and have her work as a school teacher. Though overall she is still the same character. She's the same bright ray of sunshine that gets Montag to question his role in society. Though, more importantly than that, she's actively working with the book people throughout the story. Here, it's not just by chance that her and Montag meet up so often, but it's because she's actively following him. And later on in the story, she's the one to tell Montag to cross the river, and she even tells him about the book people, making it where their appearance isn't a surprise like it is in the novella. And yes, her and Montag meet up at the end of the film and become fellow book people themselves. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention, Clarice doesn't die in this version. Though for her life, another character had to be killed to equal the balance. Faber is nowhere to be seen. His exclusion here is a little sad. Cutting him out also cuts out the warning his character gave in the book, how you shouldn't wait for it to be too late to fight back against oppressive power. Without him, the film is sorely lacking that important message from the book. Granted though, all of his actions that do carry over into the film have been given to Clarice instead. And to be honest, it is smoother storytelling to have just one character perform all of the similar actions. So I do understand Faber's omission, and it is genuinely nice to see Clarice live in this version. Another character that was changed for the movie was Mildred. First off, she's not Mildred now, she's Linda. I have no idea why they changed the name, but it does make sense, because they really are different characters. Mildred was a television-watching, radio-listening zombie that barely listened to a word that Montag would say. She was distant to her husband throughout the book, and in the end she ratted him out to the firemen without any remorse. In her final scene, she's shown to care more for her television set that she's leaving behind than Montag. There are certain elements of that in Linda. She still does watch a lot of TV, and occasionally she won't catch what Montag has said because she's too focused on the screen. But that is where their similarities stop. Here, she does care for Montag. She gives him a gift when she heard he was up for promotion. She worries for his well-being when he's uneasy, and she's legitimately remorseful for ratting out Montag in the end. Heck, they even cuddle together! I'm not sure which one I like better, Linda or Mildred. The way I see it, they both have their pros and cons. With Mildred, you have the warning about how brainless someone can become if they're fed constant slop. While that message is lost with Linda, overall, her being more of a character does make it where the audience does sympathize with her more. How she tries to keep a calm face as her husband continues to hoard more and more books inside of their house. And again, look at her expression as she leaves Montag. You really do get the mental anguish that she must have been going through before she called him out. Which is better, Mildred or Linda? I don't know. I'll just say that they're different. One character that is a film original is Fabian, a fireman that appears sporadically throughout the picture. I do not understand his deal. Several points throughout the movie he'll see Montag do something suspicious, and then he'll just not do anything about it. There's a part where he sees Montag with Clarice when Montag is supposed to be on sick leave. You think he's about to tell Beatty here, but nope, he just doesn't! Later in the film, he watches as Montag smuggles another book away, and he doesn't say a word of it to anyone. All of this builds up to later where he watches Montag stuffs another book away into his coat, and then he does tell Beatty about it. What was the point of all this? What was the point of having him see Montag do all of this shady stuff throughout the story for him to not say anything about it? Was this supposed to be a comment on the mindset of the other firemen, like how the rest may not want to call out a friend even if said friend is going against their cause? Is that why he chose to not rat out Montag at first? I feel like I'm reading way too deep into this, but that's the only thing I can even sort of guess at for why they had him here. What was his purpose in this movie? Okay, the last group of characters I want to bring up is the book people at the end of the story. In the novella, the book people are shoddily dressed men that can perfectly recall a book when the time comes. They all have their own respected names, and don't really act all that differently from characters we've seen thus far, ensuring that the firemen won't give them trouble. The film, though, takes things in a different direction. The people here don't have names, they address themselves as the books they're carrying in their brains.
I am the Journal of Henri Brulard by Stendhal.
Well, I am Plato's Republic. I'll recite myself for you whenever you like.
I'm Jean-Paul Sartre's The Jewish Question. Delighted to meet you.
But more importantly is it that they changed it to where they have to completely memorize the book cover to cover instead of just recalling it later, which I find to be a much harder pill to swallow. Bradbury does keep the specifics of perfect recall intentionally vague, maybe because he didn't really know how it's supposed to work either, but it does leave it up to where the reader has to fill in the gaps for how it could work. Here, though, no. There is no conceivable way that someone is perfectly memorizing a book like this. Even more ridiculous than that, they even show a scene of one elderly man teaching a book to his young boy. Did the filmmakers not feel silly writing something like this? Did they not feel silly filming this? It's really not helped by the fact that you can really tell that this kid is reading off a cue card. Just look at them pupils moving from line to line. Also, while they do still burn the books they learn, with the way they're acting here, it would make them extremely suspicious to the firemen. The last shot of the film is all of the book people walking around, reciting their respected books to themselves in order to remember it. Yep, no reason for the firemen to get involved here. Nothing suspicious happening whatsoever. But even worse than that, this movie establishes that the book people do spy on the rest of society. The woman who burned herself with her books were one of these people. And remember what I said about Clarice, how she was actively following Montag throughout the story? Yeah, that's because she's working with the book people too. There's even parts where people call someone else's phone to warn them of approaching firemen. The book people here lay as low as a giraffe of gigantism. And you know what? I like them more here than their book counterparts. They may be more realistic in the book, but put simply, they're more memorable in the film. Also, the idea of perfect recall in the book is already a little far-fetched, so I don't really blame the filmmakers for deciding to go all in with the concept. Also, the film was able to throw in a little cheeky reference to Bradbury with one of the book people.
I'm The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury.
I love how the camera pans away with this kid for a second, as if the film itself is like, wait, what did you just say? And last but not least, you have Montag. We'll just put Montag to the side for now. Alright, let's get into some of the misgivings I have with this film. Remember how I said the novel's setting was intentionally left vague? This helps in making the story feel timeless, even though it's been over 70 years since it was originally published. This is not the case with the film. See, this movie was shot in the United Kingdom, making this film very British. Not only do all of the actors have a strong British accent, aside from you, but again we'll get to you later, but all of the landscapes shown here are also recognized as being from Britain. Look at all of them dull skies and grey buildings and tell me that this isn't the United Kingdom. Okay, I'm mostly kidding there, but sadly another aspect of this film that also holds it back from being timeless is how friggin' 60s everything is. Look at the interior design of these rooms. It wouldn't look out of place in the Brady Bunch. That, plus all of the clothes people wear, to their hairstyles, and all of the cars that the film didn't even attempt to look futuristic, really dates this film. Granted, I'm here for it. Really, come on, how many dystopian societies are depicted with this many garish colors? Golly, this film is so 60s and British, I'm surprised that Dalek doesn't work with the firemen. Also, it is unintentionally hilarious that they're still using Fahrenheit here.
Fahrenheit 451. Fahrenheit 451.
Do you think they felt stupid not saying centigrade 233? That's such a stupid joke. Granted, it's hard to hold these aspects against the film when you consider the fact that it's not working with a Hollywood budget here. Honestly, the only part of this film that is really hurt by its filming location and budget was the crossing of the river. In the book, this scene plays out beautifully in the reader's mind. On one side, the bustling city under the night sky, 1,000 lights all scattered about the place. And on the other side, nothing but dense forest. A clear separation from society and where the boat people live. It makes sense why Montag would be safe from the police on the other side, because why would the helicopters even bother to cross over to a place where Montag could do no harm? The film misses this imagery entirely by having both sides of the creek look identical to each other, on top of the fact landscape like this had already been seen in the film. Also, the river here has been reduced to a small creek that I'm pretty sure he could have walked through it if he had to. That clear separation from city to wilderness is gone, almost making the scene feel pointless in the film. Montag crossing this tiny little creek wouldn't suddenly make him safe from the police, and the film knows this. They change it from the helicopters turning back around to Montag hiding in the boat as they fly. As they fly overhead. This is some 70s Doctor Who stuff right here. I half expect John Pertwee to pop out. Along with that Dalek I mentioned earlier. I don't even get this! As I mentioned earlier, it was helicopters in the novella, not whatever you're attempting here. Actually, it's even funnier, because the film does have a helicopter later. And no, this isn't just some stock footage, you can tell that by this shot. Why did you attempt this effect here? You had the means to be book accurate, but you chose not to and fell on your face. Ew, I really wish they just didn't attempt this scene. Without the imagery of the book, it really just falls flat, and this horrible effect only makes it worse. There are a few other shoddy effects in the film, but they're just standard 1960s stuff I didn't care to mention. Oh, one I do want to bring up though is the firehouse pole. In the book, Bradbury depicts a fireman's pole that lets the person slide up or down, and here it is in the film. At first I thought this was just some clever wire work, but no, this is a reverse shot.
There were a number of special shots he put in reverse.
So you're in for promotion, Montag. Good luck.
When the firemen go up the pole, for example.
It's simple, but a pretty solid effect. There's another reverse shot near the beginning of the film, and while it's not as good, I still didn't realize it was reversed until after I watched the making of documentary. Granted, his gloves flying towards him is a little distracting, but I digress. There are other odd editing moments in this film. One I find especially funny is this scene here, where Montag is watching Beatty scold some kids through the distorted glass. Only for it to cut back, showing that he's facing a perfectly clear window. Whoops. There's also this shot here that kills me for how obviously slowed down it is. Like, oh come on guys, I artificially slow down footage too, but I'm making videos that no one is watching. This is supposed to be a major motion picture here. But that's just some mistakes. Let's actually talk about some of the weird choices that were intentional. Trust me, there's quite a few of them. Let's start off with the film focusing on the back of Montag's head. I don't know why, but there are certain moments where they'll focus on this photograph. Here it's played on TV screens while Montag's on the run, and earlier it closes in on one of the photos like it's really important. It's clearly supposed to represent something, but for the life of me, I don't know what. Actually, it's really funny. In the making of documentary I've been showing clips of, sometimes they'll go into the symbolism of the film and describe what some abstract scenes are supposed to mean, but they don't mention the back of the head thing once. They are just as confused as I am. And in thing with this one circular shot here, there's this odd scene later in the film. This was truly so bizarre watching this for the first time, because no rational film would do this. According to the documentary, this is to draw the viewer's eye to the action. Okay, firstly, there's better ways of doing this without making your shot look like an unfinished split screen effect. Secondly, this is where everyone is being searched. Why focus on this one guy in particular? Near the middle of the film, when Montag is having his doubts about being a fireman, he's no longer able to slide up the fire pole. Okay, I get what this is going after, a visual way to show that he doesn't enjoy it anymore. But how does the pole know that? Actually, there's an unintentionally hilarious scene later where Montag starts to go down the pole, but chickens out and takes the stairs instead? Like, dude, I guarantee you that you can slide down it. I highly doubt the pole will just throw you off just because you hoard some books. Moving on from that, this film has a weird thing with older technology. First off, all of the phones depicted in the film are clearly modeled after phones from the 20s and 30s. A very odd choice for a film that's so otherwise 60 to the max. And there's this one very odd scene where Linda gifts Montag an old straight razor, and then tosses out his electric one. What is this supposed to mean? It feels like some artsy decision just for the sake of being an artsy decision. Was this to help in making the film feel timeless? Like, did they think if they just had a mix of older technology in here that would help the picture look more futuristic? Because if that's the case, it comes off as rather half-baked.
Another odd decision in this film, or rather another odd editing decision in this film, is that at certain points characters will just be talking, and then the setting will change right in the middle of their conversation. Off the top of my hand, I can think of two scenes, one earlier in the film with Montag and Linda where they're talking in the living room, and then boom, they're suddenly in their bedroom talking. And then another one much later with Montag and Clarice, where they're talking inside of Clarice's basement, then boom, they're outside. I'm pretty sure there's probably another example of this in the film, but I'm very close to getting this video done. I'm not watching the film again. You can't make me. Man, I had no idea this would be so long to make. 40 minutes, nearly 50 minutes, probably is going to be 50 minutes when it's all done.
One weird choice that I actually found to be rather cool was the opening credits. Because there are none. The start of the film has a narrator read out all of the names.
B. Duffel, Alex Scott.
Remember, in this film, all text is banned, so the credits here play out in a way to set the tone for the world you're about to be viewing. This is a really cool creative decision, and it plays over a montage of television antennas, hammering in how addictive to television this society has become. And in the original version of the opening, the narrator was one of the women on TV.
An Enterprise Vineyard production.
Do remember to tolerate your friends' friends.
Oh man, they really should have gone with that one. But even as it stands, it is a very memorable way to start the film. And the biggest bizarre decision that they make here is something you might have already noticed from the clips I've been playing. Linda and Clarice here are played by the same woman, Julia Christie. Why did they do this?
I get the sense that Linda and Clarice are two sides of one coin.
Yeah, I don't really see that, to be honest. Clarice and Linda are just two different characters here for them to supposedly be different sides of the same coin. It makes about as much sense as calling Montag and Beatty two sides of the same coin, and that they are two different people with two different opinions on books. But here's the thing. If I didn't already go into the movie knowing that these two were the same woman, I honestly wouldn't have noticed. Julia Christie pulls off both roles flawlessly. They really do feel like two different people. So in that regard, I guess I can't be too mad at the double role here. I also bet it was a good cost-cutting measure for the film.
I don't think I've seen your wife. What's she like?
She's rather like you, except her hair's long.
Okay, that's all the little oddities that I wanted to mention. How about we go over some of the things I really liked about this film now? First off, the score is simply amazing. Bernard Herrmann is the composer of this film. He was a frequent collaborator with Hitchcock, working on films such as North by Northwest, Vertigo, and probably his most iconic score being... Unlike the rest of these films, he brings his A-game here. The score of this film is really top-notch, no complaints, only praises. Another major compliment I want to give this film is its opening. Right after the already cool credit sequence, the movie plays out a scene of the firemen burning down a lot of books from someone's house. It perfectly tells the viewer how the world works here, all mostly without saying a word. And even the few words it does say a lot about the world as well.
Get out.
What?
Hurry.
Who's that?
Quickly get moving. For God's sake, get out of there.
And just like that, they've established that there's a small group of people working together, fighting against the firemen. It's also really nice that you get to see this guy later in the film with the book people. A nice touch for viewers that were paying attention. Another great scene is where Montag decides to read a book for the first time. On paper, it doesn't sound like much. All he's doing is reading from the first page of a novel, but look at how it plays out. He quite literally turns his back on television, using the light from the blank screen to read. And listen to how he reads.
Whether I shall turn out to be the hero of my own life.
It's staggered. He's struggling to read the words much like an elementary school student during a presentation. And yeah, of course he would. This is a world where all text is forbidden, so it makes sense for the man to struggle like this. It's realistic for what we've been shown so far. Admittedly, the scene does play out a bit too long, but other than that, I really do think it's brilliant. There are a few other things I really liked about this movie. It really does have a lot of things going for it, but there are two major problems with it as well. First off, the ending. There are no bombs dropped on the cities here. There are no mentions of war at all, outside of a throwaway comment from Montag made when he's talking to Linda's friends. The movie just stops with the book people here reciting their books over and over again, making the ending of this film feel incomplete and rather sad. I know it sounds weird that the version without the nuclear explosion is the sadder of the two versions, but let me explain. In the book, this is a hopeful sign for things to come. Montag and the boat people are able to help build back the walls of society, and doing so, maybe, just maybe, helping the world become a better place in the process. Here, though, the boat people are just left to recite lines indefinitely. So what do these people have to look forward to? There is nothing in this film to indicate that society is going anywhere anytime soon. These people will most likely die before any significant change is made. Heck, we actually see one of them die in the film as I mentioned earlier. And remember, in the film, it's made clear that these people are stripped of their identity, call themselves by the books they're keeping, and have to dedicate a great deal of brain power in remembering all of the lines of their respected literature. I know I'm reading way too deep into this, but this is sad. Montag and Clarice are no longer Montag and Clarice, they're whichever book they're remembering.
Okay, something I feel like I kind of have to add now. I think I know why they took out the nuclear explosion. Ray Bradbury didn't know about the dangers of fallout in 1953, but we certainly knew about the dangers of fallout and radiation by 1966 of the film's release. So, yeah, when you take that into consideration, it does make sense why they cut out the nuke altogether. But still, it leads to a weaker ending that I still do not like, even with that in mind.
Granted, I may just be a Grinch here. Some of y'all may see the ending as hopeful, watching a small group of people fight for what they believe in, even if they'll die before anything changes. But there's one other thing in this movie that's bad. Not arguably bad, like the ending, but objectively bad. Montag. Okay, real quick, the character of Montag isn't bad. He's more or less just like how he is in the novella. But the actor, Oscar Wiener, is just terrible in this. He looks so disinterested in every scene he's in, like he's just bored out of his mind and is just barely scrubbing up enough cares in the world to say his lines. At the start of the movie, where he's burned down all of the books, I thought his expression was a sign to show that his heart wasn't in it anymore, that he had just lost all enjoyment of firefighting. But no, he has the same vague, uninterested expression throughout the whole motion picture. Also, on a smaller note, I feel like I have to mention that Oscar Wiener speaks with a thick German accent in the film, which clashes pretty hard against all of the other English accents at play. I'm personally not bothered by this, but I know if I didn't mention it, some of y'all would have just assumed I couldn't tell the difference between a German accent and an English one. Anyway, I haven't seen any other movies with Wiener, so I don't know if this was just a fluke or something, but he is just really bad in this. I consider him to be the worst part of the film, which is really odd because all other performers are great in their respected roles. So what happened here? I'll tell you what happened. This all made a lot more sense after I watched the making of documentary. First off, Wiener here was a last-minute add to the film, because the original actor dropped out of the role. Who was this original actor?
After going through I don't know how many possible leading men, we got Terrence Stamp.
Yes, that Terrence Stamp. General Zod was supposed to play the role of Montag. And why did he drop out? Because after it was decided that Julie Christie was to play Linda and Clarice, Stamp felt that her role in the film would be much bigger than his, so he left. I mean, ego aside, I think it's safe to say that Terrence Stamp would have given a much better performance here than Oscar. The double role was already pointless in the film itself, but finding out that it directly led to the movie losing the better actor here makes it where I have to call it a negative decision overall now. But here's the thing, not only was Oscar here a last-minute addition to the film, but he also butted heads with the cast and crew.
Truffaut had a very difficult time with Oscar, who had his own ideas about how the part should be played, not only his part, but other people's parts.
Now he considered himself to be a Hollywood star working with, this French director. Sort of, fine, but, I'm bigger than this now.
And instead of saying, how are you, and I'm so delighted to work with you, he instantly launched into a lecture on how she should play her part. Her part, not his. And Truffaut, over the last 2 weeks, wouldn't even speak to each other. I stayed on friendly terms with Oscar as much as I could, and I had to more or less tell him what Truffaut wanted.
Oh, my lord, it all makes sense now. The reason he looked so bored in every scene is because he thought he was above the film. And it gets even worse. Near the end of production, he started actively messing with the continuity.
They were so hostile to one another that Oscar went and had his hair cut. If you look at the last 10 minutes of the film, you'll see the hair is different, and they had to ruffle it up and make it look like it was the week before.
You know you're a bad actor when you got the author himself, Ray Bradbury, dunking on you. All of this adds up to a lackluster performance that seriously bogs the film down. If this were just any other character, I wouldn't have even bothered to mention it, but this is the main lead, the person that the audience is supposed to resonate with the most. And he's just the worst part of the film. I know I sounded pretty harsh there for a bit, but let me be clear. I like the movie overall. I think it's an adequately faithful telling of Bradbury's book, while also just being a good movie by itself. That's how I see it, a good movie with flaws. Honestly, refined just a bit, I can see this being a great movie. If you're a fan of the book, I recommend giving this film a watch. And if you're a fan of the movie, I recommend giving the Making of documentary a watch. It's pretty insightful. And, of course, if you haven't read the book, give that a read as well. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and until next time, goodbye, y'all.